The oak tree had been standing in that hollow for longer than anyone alive could account for. Its trunk was wide enough that two grown men couldn't reach around it. Its roots clawed into the creek bank like fingers gripping the edge of a cliff. And on the night of September 14th, it held a woman, the way a fist holds, something it has no intention of releasing. Jolene Kincaid had been chained to that tree for 11 hours. The chain was the heavy kind, the kind used to lock down flatbed loads or secure motorcycles to trailer floors. It had been wrapped twice around her torso and once around the trunk, fastened somewhere behind the bark where her bound hands couldn't reach. Her wrists were zip-tied in front of her. Her left eye was swollen almost completely shut, the skin around it turning the purple black of a late bruise that had settled in deep and intended to stay. Dried blood had crusted along the line of her jaw. A fresh cut above her right eyebrow had stopped bleeding sometime around midnight, but hadn't closed. It sat there open and quiet like a mouth that had said everything it had to say and was now simply waiting for someone to notice. She was 37 years old. She had been wearing her leather vest when they took her. She was still wearing it now. The patches on the back, the ones that declared her a part of a world most people in these Tennessee hills would cross the street to avoid, hadn't protected her from anything. They hadn't even slowed it down. She had stopped screaming 4 hours ago. Not because the pain had stopped. The pain was a living thing now, something with its own rhythm and its own schedule. It lived in her ribs, two of which were broken for certain, and a third that was making a strong case for itself every time she tried to shift her weight. It lived in the chain where it pressed against her torso, the links biting through the leather of the vest and into the skin beneath. It lived in her wrists where the zip ties had rubbed the flesh raw, and in her shoulders where the angle of her arms had gone from uncomfortable to screaming to a kind of dull paralysis that frightened her more than the sharp pain had. She had stopped screaming because her voice had given out. And because the woods at 3 in the morning were so absolutely, completely, irreversibly silent that the sound of her own voice bouncing back from the trees and returning to her with nothing attached, no response, no footsteps, no engine, no indication that anyone, anywhere in the world knew where she was or cared, had become worse than the silence itself. The echo of her own desperation coming back empty was more terrible than the quiet. So she had stopped, and she had started thinking. Jolene Kincaid had grown up 60 miles south of where she was sitting now. Ridgewater, Tennessee, a town so small it didn't have its own zip code until 1987 and didn't have much use for one after that. Her father drove a propane truck. He left the house at 5:30 every morning and came back smelling of gallon and cold air and the particular weariness of a man who had accepted that his life was going to be a repetition of the same day for 40 years and had made his peace with it by not thinking about it too carefully. Her mother cut hair in a converted shed behind the house. She listened to country radio while she worked and told Jolene while she swept the floor and gathered the clippings into a dustpan that the secret to surviving anything was to decide early what you were willing to lose and hold on to everything else with both hands. Jolene had been 15 when she saw her first motorcycle rally. A line of machines rolling through town on a Saturday afternoon, chrome and leather and engine noise that made the windows in the hair shed rattle in their frames. She had stood on the porch and watched them pass with a feeling she didn't have a name for yet. Not attraction exactly. Not envy. Something closer to recognition. The feeling of seeing a thing and knowing before you can explain why that it belongs to the same category as something already living inside you. She met Boone Kincaid when she was 22. He was 29. Already chapter president. Already carrying the particular weight that came with leading men who had chosen a life that the rest of the world didn't understand and mostly didn't want to. He was 6'2", built like the physical work he did, and when he looked at her for the first time standing in the gravel parking lot of a roadhouse on Highway 11, she felt that same rattle from the porch in Ridgewater. That sense of something bigger than the space she had been given. They married 11 months later. 15 years. That was how long it had been. 15 years of riding beside him, of knowing every face in every chapter, of being introduced at every gathering, not by her own name, but by her position. Boone's wife. Boone's old lady. The president's woman. She had accepted the title the way she accepted the vest as part of the package, part of the life she had chosen freely, and would choose again if given the chance. She told herself the loss of her own name in other people's mouths was a small price for the belonging. But on this night, chained to a tree with her ribs broken and her eyes swollen shut, and the absolute darkness pressing in from every direction like a physical weight, Jolene Kincaid found herself thinking a thought she had never allowed herself to think clearly before. If she died here, the headline would say, "Wife of Motorcycle Club President Found Dead in Tennessee Woods." Not Jolene, not the woman who could rebuild a carburetor faster than half the men in the club, not the woman who had read every Faulkner novel twice and kept a journal in the nightstand she had never shown anyone, not even Boone, not the woman who had once talked a suicidal teenager down from a bridge railing at 2 in the morning while the rest of the world was sleeping and had never mentioned it to a single soul because it wasn't anyone else's story to tell. Wife of, that would be the sum of her. The entirety of Jolene Kincaid reduced to a possessive and a preposition. The thought settled into her like a stone dropping into deep water. It went all the way down, and when it hit the bottom, it didn't bounce. It just lay there solid and undeniable in a place she could no longer pretend she didn't see. She closed her one good eye. She leaned her head back against the bark of the tree that had been standing in this hollow since before her grandparents were born. And she made herself a deal. If someone comes, if I get out of these woods, I am done being a footnote in someone else's story. I am done making myself small. I am done deciding what I deserve based on what other people think of what I am. The deal was made in silence. No witnesses, no one to hold her to it. Just the oak tree and the creek and the cold September air, and a woman who had finally gotten quiet enough to hear what she had been telling herself for years. She opened her eye. The woods gave her nothing. No sound, no movement, no sign that anyone in the world knew she was here. The first light of dawn was still hours away, and the darkness was total, and the silence was the kind of silence that makes you wonder if the rest of the world has simply stopped existing while you weren't looking. She breathed. She waited. She held. She did not break. 6 miles to the northeast in a small house on Hadley Road, an event of no apparent significance was setting itself in motion. A beagle mix named Rusty was making a decision. Rusty was 3 years old. He had one white paw and the temperament of a creature who had decided long ago that every fence was a suggestion and every gap in every fence was a personal invitation that it would be rude to decline. He was smart in the way that certain dogs are smart, not in the way that performs tricks or follows commands, but in the way that recognizes opportunity and acts on it without consulting anyone. The gap near the old shed had been there for weeks. Rusty had been studying it the way a safecracker studies a vault, making small investigations, testing the give of the wire, measuring the space with his nose and his shoulders. At 12:14 on the afternoon of September 15th, he made his move. He squeezed through with the boneless efficiency of a dog who has done this calculation and likes the math, and he was gone. Into the pines, into the brush, into the creek corridors that stretched for nearly a mile behind the property and beyond. Caleb Whitfield was 8 years old. He was Rusty's person in the way that certain dogs belong to certain children. Not through ownership, but through a mutual recognition that operated below the level of language in the place where loyalty and stubbornness and the willingness to follow each other into trouble lived side by side. When Rusty went through the fence, Caleb went after him. That was the arrangement. That had always been the arrangement. He had been chasing the dog for the better part of 2 hours. His sneakers were soaked through from the creek crossings, the canvas heavy and dark with water that squelched with every step. His shirt had a new tear near the left shoulder, where a low pine branch had caught him off guard, snagging the fabric and pulling before letting go. His shorts were dirty at the knees from a fall on a muddy bank. His arms had thin red scratches from the brush he had pushed through without slowing down. His grandmother, Mabel Whitfield, had no idea he had gone this far. That detail mattered. It mattered because Mabel Whitfield was a woman who operated on the principle that knowing where your people were at all times was not optional. It was the baseline, the minimum, the price of admission to the business of being alive in her household. She had raised 2 children and buried a husband and lived 63 years in this county, and she had learned through experience that the moment you stopped paying attention to where the people you loved were was the moment the world found a way to put them somewhere you didn't want them to be. If she had known her grandson was a mile deep in the woods with evening coming on, the events of this story would have unfolded very differently. She would have called the sheriff. She would have put on her boots. She would have gone into those trees herself at 63 with a flashlight and the kind of determined fury that only a grandmother can bring to a search and rescue operation. But she didn't know, and Caleb kept going. He had the phone. That was the other detail that mattered, the one that would turn out to be the hinge on which everything else would swing. It was Mabel's old prepaid phone, the kind they sold at the gas station on Route 4 for $20, thick as a deck of cards and about as elegant. She had given it to him the previous summer after the incident with the deer. He had found it near the creek shot and left to die, its eyes still open, still soft with confusion about what the world had done to it. He had come home shaking and unable to explain why, and Mabel had sat with him on the porch until the shaking stopped, and then she had pressed the phone into his hands with 3 numbers programmed in it. Home, 911, and Mrs. Crowell next door. "You go past the fence line, you take this," she had said. I mean it. He had taken it. He didn't always remember to bring it. But today, by luck, or by something bigger than luck, something that operated in the space between coincidence and design where the most important things in life tend to happen, it was in the side pocket of his cargo shorts. He had been calling Rusty's name for a solid 15 minutes. The sound of his own voice bouncing off the trees had started to sound thin and pointless, the way a voice does when it isn't being answered. He was pushing through brush that grabbed at his arms, ducking low branches that tried to clothesline him, moving steadily in the direction of the creek, because Rusty always went to the creek when he was feeling rebellious. The water sound was getting louder. The light was getting longer. The afternoon was tilting toward that golden hour that made everything in the Tennessee woods look warm and ancient, like a memory of something that had happened a long time ago and was being shown to you one more time before it was put away. And then he heard something. It was not the creek. It was not a bird. It was not the wind doing the thing it did sometimes in the upper branches, where it sounded almost like a voice but wasn't. This was a voice, not loud, not anything close to loud. It was the sound a voice makes when it has been screaming for so long that it has almost given up on screaming entirely. Hoarse, thin, frayed at the edges. But it was words. He was certain of it. The particular shape of human language, the rhythm and the spacing and the intent behind it was unmistakable, even at this distance, even through the filter of trees and water and wind. He stopped walking. "Hello?" he called out. Silence. Complete holding silence. And then a sharp intake of breath, the kind of sound a person makes when they have been alone for so long that the sound of another human voice has become a thing they have stopped believing in, and the sudden reappearance of it is as frightening as it is welcome. "Hello," Caleb tried again. Louder this time. He put his whole voice behind it the way you do when you are 8 years old and have not yet learned that there are situations where announcing your presence might not be wise. And then barely above the sound of the creek in a voice that was raw and rough and desperately fiercely alive. "Help. Please help me." Caleb Whitfield stood absolutely still for 3 full seconds. In those seconds, his brain did what brains do in that kind of moment. It ran through everything at once. Every warning his grandmother had given about strangers in the woods. Every scary story. Every ghost story told at school during lunch when the teachers weren't listening. Every news headline he had accidentally overheard from the living room television while pretending to be asleep on the couch. Every piece of advice about the woods being a place where you watched your step and minded your business and came home before dark. All of it ran through him in 3 seconds. And at the end of those 3 seconds, he started walking toward the voice. He would never be able to fully explain why he did that. Not to the deputy, not to the reporters, not to the hundreds and eventually thousands of people who would ask him the same question in different words over the days and weeks and years that followed. The explanations he would give would always feel incomplete to him, partial, like a map that showed the roads but not the reason for the journey. The closest he would come was what his grandmother had told him once, pressing a warm dish towel into his hands after supper. In the quiet, matter-of-fact way she said things that she meant to be remembered. "Some people walk past trouble," she had said, "and some people can't. You, baby, are the second kind, and that's going to cost you sometimes, but it's going to make you worth something." He pushed through a thick cluster of low pines. The branches scraped both his arms, leaving fresh red lines across the scratches that were already there. The brush was dense and resistant and seemed to be actively trying to hold him back, and he pushed through it the way you push through things when you are 8 years old and have not yet learned that most obstacles are meant to stop you. And then he was in a small clearing near the creek bank, and he saw her. She was sitting on the ground with her back against the massive oak tree. A heavy chain, the kind he had seen on the flatbed trailers that sometimes parked at the feed store on Route 4, was wrapped twice around her torso and around the trunk of the tree fastened somewhere behind the bark he couldn't see. Her wrists were bound in front of her, with zip ties, the plastic digging into skin that had gone red and raw. She was wearing jeans, black boots, a black leather vest over a torn gray shirt that had once been clean and was now stained with dirt and sweat, and something dark along the left side that might have been blood. Her dark hair was matted and tangled with bits of bark and pine needles. Her left eye was swollen, almost completely shut, the skin around it a deep violent purple that looked wrong against the rest of her face. Dried blood had crusted along her jaw in a line that started near her ear and ran down to her chin. A fresh cut above her right eyebrow was still seeping very slowly the way a wound does when it has been open long enough to exhaust itself but hasn't quite given up. She was looking straight at him, and her first words, the very first thing she said to him, were not what he expected. Kid. Her voice was barely holding itself together, rough and low and raw in a way that made it sound like it belonged to someone much older. You need to leave, right now. Caleb blinked. Are you okay? No. She coughed, and the cough turned into a wince that she managed by going very still and breathing through her nose with her eyes closed until it passed. And you won't be either if you stay. I'm serious. There were two of them. They might still be close. You need to go. Now. Caleb didn't move. She stared at him. Her one working eye was dark and direct and flat with exhaustion. It was the look he recognized from his grandmother's face on the hard days, past the point of asking for things, past the point of hoping out loud, arrived at the place where the only thing left to do is manage what's happening with whatever you have left, which isn't much. Kid, she said again, firmer, more force behind it, though the force cost her something in the ribs. I'm telling you to leave. I'm not leaving, Caleb said. The words came out of him simply, not defiantly, not with any particular drama, just a statement of fact delivered with the plain certainty of someone who has assessed the situation and made a decision and does not intend to revisit it. She let out a breath, long and slow and shaking, like she had been holding it for a very long time, and the act of releasing it was as painful as everything else. How old are you? 8. She closed her eye. She kept it closed for a moment longer than a blink, and when she opened it, something in her face had shifted. It wasn't relief. It was more complicated than relief. It was the look of someone who has been alone in pain for so long that even the wrong kind of help that is small and unlikely, and arrives in the form of a boy in wet sneakers who by all logic should not be here, feels like light through a crack in a door that you had believed was sealed shut. Do you have a phone? Yeah, call 911, Jung. Okay, Caleb reached into his cargo pocket. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, though fear was there running quietly alongside everything else, like a parallel track he was choosing not to look at. The shaking was from the cold, from the wet sneakers, from the adrenaline that his body had released the moment he had pushed through those pines and seen her a chemical event that his brain hadn't caught up with yet. He pulled out the phone. The screen was dim. The battery indicator showed a thin red sliver. My name is Caleb Whitfield, he said. He said it before he dialed, before he did anything. He said it to her looking at her directly like he was introducing himself properly before doing the thing that needed to be done. Like the thing that needed to be done required that they know each other's names first. Like even in this moment in this clearing, with this woman chained to this tree, the rules of meeting someone still applied. The woman stared at him, and for just a moment, a single moment, so brief it could have been missed, a tear slid down the one cheek that wasn't too swollen to feel it. It tracked through the dried blood on her jaw and fell. Call, she said, very quietly. Please, he dialed. The phone rang once, twice. The dispatcher picked up. 911, what's your emergency? Caleb Whitfield's voice came out steadier than anyone had a right to expect from an 8-year-old boy standing in wet sneakers next to a chained woman in the middle of the Tennessee woods at the edge of an afternoon that was rapidly running out of light. There's a lady chained to a tree near the creek behind my grandmother's house on Hadley Road. She's bleeding. She can't get loose. I think someone hurt her on purpose. You need to come fast." There was a brief pause on the other end, the kind of pause that meant the dispatcher was doing three things at once, typing and flagging and dispatching all, while keeping her voice at the exact register of professional calm that the training manual said would keep a caller from panicking. "Can you stay on the line with me, sweetheart?" "Yes, ma'am." "Is the woman conscious and breathing?" Caleb looked at Jolene. She was watching him with her one open eye. The look in it had changed again. The flat exhaustion was still there, but something else had moved into the space behind it. Something that looked like the very first, very cautious, very fragile beginning of belief. "Yes," he said. "She's awake. She's talking. Are there any other people nearby?" He looked around the clearing. Trees in every direction. The creek moving over rocks. Wind in the upper canopy. The long gold bars of afternoon light falling through the pines. Nothing else, no one. "I don't see anyone." "Okay, units are being dispatched now. I need you to stay where you are and stay on the line." "What's your name?" "Caleb Whitfield." "Good. Caleb, you did the right thing calling. Can you tell me the woman's name?" He lowered the phone slightly and looked at her. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Just for a second, but it was the kind of hesitation that had weight to it. The kind that comes when a name is more than a name. When saying it in this place, in this condition, chained to a tree with your face broken and your ribs cracked and your dignity hanging by a thread that is fraying by the hour, means letting someone know exactly who has been brought to their knees, exactly whose story is about to become public, exactly whose name is about to be spoken into a radio frequency and carried across county lines and into the ears of people who will make judgments based on it before they know a single thing about the person it belongs to. "Jolene," she said finally. "Jolene Kincaid." He put the phone back to his ear. "Her name is Jolene Kincaid." There was a longer pause from the dispatcher this time. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. An eternity in the language of emergency communication, where every second of dead air means someone is processing something that doesn't fit the standard script. In that silence, though Caleb didn't know it yet, the name Jolene Kincaid had just changed the temperature of the entire situation. The dispatcher had heard it. She had typed it. And somewhere in the back of that 911 center, someone who had worked these counties for 20 years, who knew the names and the histories and the tangled loyalties of every significant player in the region, was already sitting up straighter in their chair. Because in this part of Tennessee, the name Kincaid was not a quiet one. It was a name that moved through rooms ahead of the person it belonged to. A name that made police dispatchers type faster and sheriffs make phone calls, and ordinary citizens form opinions they would swear were not opinions but established facts. "Caleb," the dispatcher said, and her voice had shifted, still professional, still calm, but calibrated now. "Careful. I want you to move a few steps away from the tree. Not far, just a few steps. And keep your eyes open, okay? Don't approach anyone you don't know." "Okay," he said. He lowered the phone just enough to look at Jolene. "They're coming," he told her. She nodded. Her jaw was tight. She was breathing through her nose with the controlled, deliberate rhythm of someone managing a level of pain they had made a temporary peace with. Not comfortable, not bearable, just manage. One breath at a time, one moment at a time. The way you get through things when the only alternative to getting through them is not getting through them, and you have decided that is not an option. "How long have you been here?" Caleb asked. "Don't know." She shifted slightly against the tree, and the shift turned into a wince that she managed by going absolutely still and closing her eye. "Since last night. Maybe. I lost track. Last night." The words landed in Caleb's stomach like something heavy dropped from a height. He thought about the darkness in these woods, the absolute, total, impenetrable darkness that came when the sun went down and the trees closed in overhead and the canopy blocked out whatever light the moon and stars might have offered. He thought about the sounds that lived in that darkness, the creek, the insects, the things that moved in the brush, the things that didn't move but were there. He thought about being alone in all of that, unable to move, unable to call for help that would come, unable to know if the morning would bring rescue or something worse, unable to know anything except the pain and the cold and the terrible expanding silence of a world that had decided you were not important enough to find. The thought lasted 1 second. He pushed it away because there was nothing useful in it. Feeling bad about what she had already survived didn't help her survive the next part. His grandmother had taught him that too, in her way. Sympathy is fine, Mabel had told him once, but it doesn't fix the fence. Get the hammer. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the water bottle. It was half empty, warm from the afternoon. Not much, not enough, but something. He held it out to her. She looked at the bottle, then at him. Her expression did something complicated, something that had several things in it at once, surprise and confusion, and a kind of bewildered gratitude that she did not seem to know what to do with. You can't reach it, he said. Her bound hands were too far from her face to hold anything to her own lips. He stepped closer, close enough that he could tilt the bottle to her mouth. Here. She drank, slowly at first, like her throat had forgotten how to do it, like the muscles involved in swallowing had gone dry and stiff from hours of disuse. Then less slowly, and the sound she made when the water hit, a small, involuntary sound from the back of her throat, was the sound of something essential being returned to a person who had forgotten what essential felt like. She drank until the bottle was empty. Then she pulled her face back and breathed. Why are you helping me? Her voice was very quiet, not suspicious, not testing him, not looking for an angle or a motive. Genuinely, honestly, deeply bewildered. Like the concept of unprompted help had become foreign to her somewhere between last night and this moment. Like she had spent so many years in a world where everything came with conditions and expectations and the unspoken mathematics of loyalty and debt, that the idea of a thing given freely without calculation, without a ledger entry, without an understanding about what would be owed in return, had stopped being something she could recognize on sight. And Jolene Kincaid, who had grown up in Ridgewater and married Boone Kincaid and spent 15 years being introduced as someone's wife, heard in her own question the sound of a woman who had forgotten that help could exist without conditions. And that forgetting, she realized in this moment, was its own kind of chain. A chain she had wrapped around herself, a chain that no one had forced on her. A chain she had accepted one link at a time over 15 years, because accepting it was easier than questioning it. Caleb thought about the question for a second. He looked at her swollen eye, her bound wrists, the chain cutting into the leather over her ribs, the dried blood on her jaw, the cut above her brow, the whole terrible catalog of what someone had done to her and what the hours since had added. Because you need it, he said. 3 words, delivered without hesitation, without qualification, without any awareness of how profound they were. He said them the way a child says things that are true, simply, because the truth was simple. Jolene didn't speak for a long moment. The creek kept moving. A bird called once from somewhere in the trees and went silent, like it had said its piece and was waiting for someone else to take a turn. The afternoon light angled through the canopy and fell across the clearing in long golden bars that made the whole scene look like something painted rather than lived. And in that silence, Jolene Kincaid, who had spent a night in the dark making a deal with herself about who she would be if she survived, heard an 8-year-old boy say 3 words that did what the chain and the darkness and the broken ribs had not been able to do. They reached the place she had been protecting. Because you need it. Not because of who her husband was. Not because of the patches on her vest. Not because of the Kincaid name and everything it carried in these hills. Not because there was a favor to be earned, or a debt to be created, or a story to be told later in which the teller came out looking good. Because she needed it. Because she was a person in pain. And he was there. The simplicity of it. The absolute irreducible simplicity. A boy and a bottle of water and the elementary human math of seeing someone who needs something and giving it to them. Something broke open in Jolene that the chain hadn't been able to reach. Something that the iron scorpions, with their cruelty, and the darkness with its silence, and the oak tree with its immovable grip, had not been able to get to. Because it wasn't in her ribs or her eye or her wrists. It was in the place where she had stored all the years of being someone's title instead of someone's name. And it broke open the way ice breaks in the spring, not all at once, but along a crack that had been forming for a long time and was now finally given permission to run. You're going to be okay, Caleb told her. He said it the way his grandmother said things she meant. Not as a comfort, not as a hope, as a fact she had personally decided to enforce. As though the universe's cooperation on the matter was appreciated but not required. Jolene looked at him with her one good eye. What did you say your name was? Caleb? Caleb Whitfield. Caleb Whitfield, she repeated, slowly, like she was putting it somewhere she wouldn't lose it. Like she was filing it in the part of her memory reserved for things that were going to matter for a long time. The first siren was still far off, a faint thread of sound winding through the hills too distant to measure in miles. Just a presence, a promise of motion coming from somewhere beyond the trees. He heard it. She heard it. They're coming, he said. I know, she said. Do you want me to stay? She looked at the trees around the clearing. She looked at her bound hands resting in her lap. She looked at the chain and the ground and the creek and the sky, visible through the canopy, where the light was starting to take on the amber quality of late afternoon. She looked at all of it, at the whole small world of this clearing that had been her prison for 11 hours and was now, because of this boy, about to stop being that. Then she looked at him. Yeah, she said, I do. So he stayed. He sat down on the ground next to the oak tree, not touching the chain, not in the way of anything medical or mechanical or urgent, just sitting, being present, his wet sneakers soaking into the dirt, his heartbeat starting to slow down from the sprint pace it had been running since he first heard her voice through the trees. He kept the phone at his ear. The dispatcher was still there, asking small questions every 30 seconds or so, checking in, keeping the line warm, the way you keep a hand on someone's shoulder when they need to know you haven't left. Caleb answered each question. He watched the tree line. He watched Jolene. There was something about the way she was breathing now that was different from when he had first pushed through the pines. Still controlled, still tight, but there was a rhythm to it that hadn't been there before, a regularity. Like the knowledge that it was almost over, that the thing she had been enduring was approaching its end, had allowed her to unclench something she had been holding in a fist for 11 hours. You got family, she asked him, out of nowhere, like the question had been sitting in her and had decided this was its moment. My grandmother, Mabel Whitfield. She lives on Hadley Road. She doesn't know how far I went. Something that might have been the very edge of a smile crossed Jolene's face. Just the edge. The ghost of what a smile would be if the situation allowed for smiles. She's going to be real unhappy with you. Yeah. Caleb thought about it. He pictured Mabel's face, the crossed arms, the set jaw, the look that meant she had already moved past fear and into the harder, more complicated territory beyond it. Yeah, she really is. Good grandmother, the best. Jolene made a sound that was almost a laugh, but caught itself before it could hurt her ribs. She winced at the attempt and waited for the wince to pass. Hold on to that, she said, softly, with something in her voice that was not instructional but confessional, like she was speaking from experience, like she was telling him about a mistake she had made so that he could avoid making the same one. Don't take that for granted for a single day. You hear me? Yes, ma'am. She looked at him sharply. How old did you say you are? 8. 8 years old, and you just called me, ma'am. She shook her head, slowly, carefully, because of the eye and the ribs and the general fragility of a body that had been through what hers had been through. Where did you come from, Caleb Whitfield? He didn't have an answer for that, so he shrugged. And the shrug was so perfectly, completely 8 years old, so utterly normal in the middle of something that was utterly not normal, that Jolene felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with the broken ribs. The sirens were closer now, much closer. He could hear tires on gravel somewhere beyond the trees. 2 vehicles, maybe 3, moving fast. The sound of help arriving has a particular quality to it that is different from all other sounds. It is urgent, but it is welcome. It is loud, but it carries relief. It is the sound of the world remembering that you exist and deciding to do something about it. Caleb stood up. They're here, he said. Caleb. Her voice stopped him. He turned back. Her jaw was set. Her eye was steady on him. Her wrists were still bound, the chain still wrapped twice around her ribs, the oak still holding her in place with its ancient, indifferent strength. But the way she looked at him in that moment had none of the resignation that had been in her face when he first pushed through those pines. The flatness was gone. The emptiness was gone. Something had moved into the space behind her eye that was fierce and bright and absolutely certain. When this is over, she said, when everything settles, I need you to do something. What? Tell them I didn't break. Her voice didn't shake. Tell them Jolene Kincaid didn't break. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. He didn't ask who she meant by them. He didn't need to. He understood in the way that children understand things they cannot yet explain that she was talking about everyone. The men in the club, the police, the people in town, the world at large that would hear her name and make its judgments. All of them. I'll tell them, he said, and then the sound of boots on pine needles and the crackle of a police radio cut through the trees, and the first deputy pushed into the clearing with his hand on his hip and his eyes moving fast across everything, taking it in with the trained sweep of a man who has arrived at a scene and needs to understand it in 3 seconds or less. Caleb raised his free hand, his left hand, the one not holding the phone to his ear. And he said in a voice so steady it would be quoted back to him years later in newspaper articles and television interviews and in the quiet conversations that people have when they are trying to explain to each other what courage looks like when it shows up in a place you weren't expecting it. She's here. She's alive. I stayed with her. The deputy stopped. He looked at the woman chained to the tree. He looked at the chain. He looked at the swollen eye and the blood and the zip ties. He looked at the leather vest with his patches. And then he looked at the 8-year-old boy standing next to her with an empty water bottle in his backpack and a half-dead prepaid phone pressed to his ear and wet sneakers that had been wet for so long the soles were starting to come apart. "You called this in?" the deputy asked. "Yes, sir." The deputy's jaw moved once. A small, tight movement that might have been surprise or might have been the effort of keeping something else from showing on his face. Then he clicked his radio and said, "We've got her. She's alive. Send word to the sergeant. You're not going to believe who found her." Behind him, 2 more deputies were pushing into the clearing. One already had bolt cutters in his hands. Another had a medical kit. They moved around Caleb with the efficiency and urgency and professional calm of people who have been trained to manage exactly this kind of scene. They went to work on the chain. They went to work on the zip ties. They went to work on the things that could be fixed immediately, while the things that couldn't be fixed immediately were cataloged and assessed and prioritized. But Jolene's eye, her one good eye, stayed on Caleb, and it held something he would spend a long time trying to name correctly. Not just gratitude, though gratitude was part of it. Not just relief, though. Relief was there too. It was the look of a woman who had spent a night in the dark alone in pain, convinced that no one was coming, that the world had forgotten her, or decided she wasn't worth the effort, and who had been wrong. That specific wrong, the kind that reaches into the place where you store your understanding of how the world works and rearranges everything. He watched them cut the chain. He watched Jolene exhale when the pressure around her ribs released a sound that was part relief and part pain and part something he didn't have a word for. He watched the paramedic kneel beside her and start the assessment questions. Name, date. Could she feel her hands? Did she know where she was? What year it was? He watched her answer each one precisely and without hesitation, never wavering, never breaking down. She had said she didn't break. She hadn't been lying. One of the deputies, a thick-shouldered man with gray at his temples, put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. Not heavily, just a hand, the weight of acknowledgement. "You did good, son," he said, gruffly, like the words cost him something to say. "You did real good." Caleb nodded. The tiredness was arriving now. It had been waiting outside the clearing like something polite giving him space to do what needed to be done before it came in and made itself known. Now it was here. The long run through the woods, the adrenaline that had been burning in his blood for the past hour, the fear that had been running parallel to his actions the whole time without him giving it permission to show itself. All of it was settling into his legs, in his arms, in his eyes. But he didn't sit down. He stayed standing. He stayed standing while they got Jolene on the stretcher, while they wrapped her in the silver emergency blanket, while the oxygen mask was placed below her chin and the IV was threaded into her left arm and the straps were secured and she was ready to be moved. And as they lifted her, she turned her head and found him. Caleb Whitfield. Her voice was stronger now, still rough, still raw, but stronger. The voice of a woman who was coming back from somewhere far away and could feel the ground getting solid under her again. "You remember what I asked you to tell them?" "I remember. Say it back to me." He looked her straight in the eye. Jolene Kincaid didn't break. She held his gaze for one long, clear second. A second that contained more than most seconds contain. A second in which two people who had met in the worst possible circumstances and under the most extreme possible conditions looked at each other and recognized something in the other that they would carry for the rest of their lives. Then she let them carry her out of the woods. Caleb stood alone in the clearing next to the great oak tree. The chain lay on the ground where they had dropped it after cutting it free. The creek kept moving. The birds had come back tentatively, the way birds come back after a disturbance one at a time, checking to see if the coast was clear. Somewhere behind him, far off through the pines, he heard Rusty barking. That particular bark that Rusty used when he wanted to communicate that he was right here and had been right here all along and didn't understand what all the fuss was about. Caleb exhaled, a long, slow exhale that emptied his lungs completely. He reached down, picked up the empty water bottle from the ground where he had dropped it after Jolene had finished drinking and tucked it back into his backpack. Then he turned and walked out of the woods. He did not know yet that the name Jolene Kincaid had already reached the dispatch center and been spoken into a radio frequency that carried it within the hour to 6 different counties. He did not know that it would reach before the sun set the ears of a man named Boone Kincaid, a man with a full beard and 200,000 miles on his motorcycle and 500 brothers who would follow him without question to the end of the earth and beyond if he pointed in that direction and said ride. He did not know that what he had done in that clearing was already becoming something larger than itself, that it was already growing beyond the boundaries of one boy and one woman and one oak tree and moving outward the way ripples move through water in every direction at once. He just knew that Rusty needed to be found, and that his grandmother was going to be furious, and that for some reason he couldn't explain and wouldn't try to, he felt more like himself than he had ever felt, more certain of who he was and what he was made of, more settled into his own skin, like something that had always been there, something that had been waiting for its moment, had finally been called forward and had answered. He pushed through the tree line and the afternoon light hit his face, full and warm and golden, and he called out Rusty's name. And somewhere close, the beagle answered. Mabel Whitfield was standing on the porch when Caleb came out of the trees. She had her arms crossed. Her jaw was set in that specific way that Caleb knew meant she had already decided not to cry, had already moved past the stage where crying was available to her as an option, had arrived at the harder, quieter place on the other side of it, the place where the fear had burned itself out, and what was left was a kind of crystallized composure that could cut glass. She had heard the sirens. She had seen the deputy's cruiser fly past the driveway, the red and blue lights flickering through the living room curtains. She had called out for Caleb twice from the back fence, her voice carrying across the yard and into the first row of pines, and then stopping, absorbed by the trees, returned to her as nothing but wind. She had gotten nothing back. And in the 40 minutes between that silence and the sight of him walking out of the tree line with wet sneakers and a tear in his shirt, and a look on his face that she had never seen on him before, Mabel Whitfield had lived through approximately 4 different versions of the worst day of her life. She had lived through the version where he was lost, the version where he was hurt, the version where he was taken, and the version she couldn't bring herself to complete, the one that started with a knock on the door and a deputy with his hat in his hands and a sentence that began with, "Ma'am, I'm sorry." She had lived through all of them. And she had come out the other side standing on her porch with her arms crossed because that was what she did. She stood. She held. She did not fold. She didn't say anything when she saw him. She walked down the porch steps across the yard past the fence line where the grass turned to dirt, and when she reached him, she grabbed both his shoulders and held him at arm's length and looked at every inch of his face, his eyes, his forehead, his cheeks, his jaw. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they need to confirm with their own eyes, because the alternative, the possibility that it might not be real, is too enormous to entertain even for a second. "I'm okay," Caleb said. "I know you are. I can see that." She exhaled slowly through her nose, the kind of exhale that releases something that has been held for a long time. Rusty came back 20 minutes ago, came back through the gap in the fence, muddy to his ears, completely unbothered. She paused. "Which means you went past the creek." "Yes, ma'am." "How far past?" "Pretty far." Her grip on his shoulders tightened, not painfully, but enough to communicate that the next words out of her mouth were going to be said with the full weight of 63 years behind them. Caleb Allen Whitfield. I heard someone, he said. I couldn't leave. She looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were sharp and brown and full of something she wasn't saying yet, something that was working itself out behind them, the way weather works itself out behind mountains gathering force before it comes through. Then she pulled him forward and held him against her chest, and he let her. He let his face press into the fabric of her dress, and he let her arms go around him, and he let the tiredness and the fear and the relief and the particular weight of what he had just experienced settle into the space between their bodies where it could be shared. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. There's a deputy sitting in our driveway, Mabel said into the top of his head. He wants to talk to you. He's been waiting politely, and I've been telling him politely that he was going to have to keep waiting until I had eyes on my grandson. She pulled back and looked at him. You ready? Yes, ma'am. She kept one hand on his shoulder all the way to the driveway. The deputy's name was Harlan Briggs. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, with a calm face and the kind of eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. The kind of man who had been doing his job long enough that the what had become part of him had seeped into the way he stood and the way he talked and the way he looked at a situation and read it the way a farmer reads weather with experience and caution and the knowledge that the forecast is almost never the whole story. He stepped out of the cruiser when he saw them coming, and he took off his hat. Caleb noticed that. He didn't fully know why it mattered, but something in the gesture, in the deliberate choice to remove the hat in the presence of a 63-year-old woman and her 8-year-old grandson registered as significant, as something that meant the deputy was not here in the capacity of authority, but in the capacity of respect. Ma'am, Briggs said to Mabel. Then he looked at Caleb. You Caleb Whitfield? Yes, sir. You the one who called in the woman at Hadley Creek? Yes, sir. Briggs looked at him for a moment, the same assessing look the paramedic had given Jolene. Running a quick check, confirming something was real that he hadn't fully believed until he saw it with his own eyes. He crouched down to Caleb's level. Men in uniform didn't always do that. Some of them talked to children from their full height, the way you talk to something that is below you. Briggs didn't. He came down. He put himself at 8-year-old eye level, and Caleb respected it. I need to ask you some questions, Briggs said, about what you saw, what you heard, whether anyone else was in those woods when you were there. Is that okay? Yes, sir. Good man. He looked up at Mabel. Ma'am, is there somewhere we can sit? They sat on the porch. Mabel brought out sweet tea without being asked. She set it on the rail and stood with her arms folded in a way that made clear she was not going anywhere, and that the deputy's questions would be asked in her presence, and that this was not a point open for discussion. Briggs didn't object. He pulled out a small notepad and a pen, and he asked Caleb to walk him through everything. From the moment he heard Jolene's voice to the moment the first deputy pushed into the clearing, Caleb told it, cleanly, in order. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't embellish. He didn't leave things out. He told it the way it had happened with the particular precision of a child who is not yet old enough to have learned that stories are supposed to be shaped and edited and arranged for maximum effect. He just told the truth. All of it, in the order it occurred. When he got to the part about Jolene telling him to run, Briggs's pen stopped moving. Just for a second. A small pause that most people wouldn't have noticed. She told you to leave, yes, sir, twice. And you didn't know, sir. Briggs made a note, wrote something in his notepad that Caleb couldn't read from across the table. Did she say anything about who put her there? Did she give any names? Caleb thought carefully. Genuinely carefully, the way you think when you understand that accuracy matters. No, she just said there were 2 of them, and they might still be close. Did you see anyone else? Any vehicles? Any sounds from the road? No, sir, just the creek and birds. Briggs nodded slowly. He wrote something else. Then he looked up, and his eyes changed. Something shifted in them, some gear engaged that hadn't been engaged during the routine portion of the interview. Son, he said, and the word landed with a weight that was different from the way adults usually said it to children. Not dismissive, not generic, not the casual, reflexive son that men used as a placeholder for a name they hadn't bothered to learn. Actual, direct, loaded with the kind of respect that meant the person using it had decided the person they were using it toward had earned it. Do you know who Jolene Kincaid is? Caleb shook his head. Briggs glanced at Mabel for a half second. A quick check. Then back to the boy. Her husband is a man named Boone Kincaid. He's the chapter president of a motorcycle club that operates across most of this region. He paused to let that land. Do you understand what I mean by motorcycle club? Like the outlaw clubs, Caleb said. The ones on TV. Briggs didn't flinch. He gave Caleb credit for knowing what he was talking about without making a face about it. Something like that, yes. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because when news of this gets out, and it will get out fast because these things always do, there are going to be a lot of people paying attention to what happened today, to where it happened, and to who found her. He let that settle. He let the quiet on the porch hold it the way a shelf holds a heavy book. I want to make sure you and your grandmother understand that. Mabel spoke from behind him. Her voice was level, controlled. The voice of a woman who has been given information she did not want and is processing it in real time while making sure her face doesn't show the processing. Are we in any danger? Deputy, I don't believe so, Briggs said carefully. The people who did this to Mrs. Kincaid, that's a separate matter, and we're working it actively. But the people who are going to respond to it, Boone Kincaid's people, I want to be straight with you. They're going to want to know everything, and one of the things they're going to want to know is your grandson's name. The porch went quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when a conversation has arrived at the place where the comfortable things have been said and the uncomfortable things are waiting to be addressed. And what do we do when they come asking, Mabel said. That's your call to make, ma'am. I can't tell you what to say to civilians. What I can tell you is that from what I've seen today, your grandson didn't do anything wrong. He did something most grown men wouldn't have done. He looked back at Caleb. You probably saved her life. You know that Caleb didn't answer right away. He thought about Jolene's face in the clearing, the absolute disbelief. The way her one good eye had looked when he first pushed through the pines wide and empty and resigned to the idea that the world was not going to help her. He thought about the sound she had made when the water hit. That involuntary essential sound. She was there since last night, Caleb said quietly. We know, Briggs said. She was reported missing at around 11. We'd been looking. She said she didn't break. Caleb looked up at the deputy. She said to tell people that. Something moved across Harlan Briggs's face, quick, controlled. The way emotions move across the faces of men who have trained themselves not to let them run loose. A man in his line of work could not afford to feel things publicly. But he could afford a moment, just a moment, where the feeling showed itself before he put it away. He wrote something in the notepad. He pressed his lips together, briefly. I'll pass that along, he said. He finished his questions, left his card with Mabel, told them he would be in touch, and pulled slowly out of the driveway, the cruiser crunching over the gravel and turning onto Hadley Road and disappearing around the bend. Caleb watched it go. Then Mabel sat down in the chair beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The evening was coming on. The light was changing. The shadows were getting longer across the yard in the way they did at this time of day, when everything in the world seemed to stretch out and settle down. How are you, Mabel asked. Tired, and my sneakers are soaked. I know. Take them off. I'll stuff them with newspaper. He pulled his sneakers off and set them on the porch. Rusty patted over from the corner where he had been lying and sniffed them with the deep professional interest of a boy who found all wet things personally compelling. Caleb scratched him behind the ear. Grammy. What's going to happen now? Mabel took a long, slow sip of her sweet tea. She looked out at the yard, at the fence, at the tree line beyond the fence where her grandson had gone in as one thing and come out as something slightly different. I don't know, she said, but I think you rattled something today, baby. Something bigger than you know. She was right. She just didn't know yet how right she was. 40 miles away in a converted garage on the outskirts of Millfield, a phone rang. The man who answered it was sitting at a metal work table with a half-disassembled carburetor in front of him and grease up to both elbows. He was 44 years old, 6'2", built like someone who had spent the better part of 2 decades doing physical work without particularly caring if the physical work was comfortable. His forearms were thick. His hands were large. His shoulders had the permanent forward set of a man who spent more time leaning over engines than leaning back in chairs. His name was Boone Kincaid. And when he heard his vice president's voice on the other end of the line, he went completely still. We found her. Boone didn't speak for 3 full seconds. His hands resting on the table on either side of the carburetor curled very slowly into fists. The grease on his knuckles made the fists look darker than they were. Where Hadley Creek, off the Asheville County Road. She was chained to a tree, Boone. They chained her to a tree and left her. The sound Boone Kincaid made was not a word. It came from somewhere deep in his chest. A low, tight sound. The sound of something crossing a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. The sound of a man arriving at the place where the normal rules of behavior, the rules that keep civilization running, the rules that he had agreed to follow most of the time, because following them was generally more practical than not following them, stopped applying. How bad she's alive. She's at County General right now. Eyes swollen shut, some broken ribs. Cuts. She's conscious. She's talking. A pause. She's asking for you. Boone was already standing. The carburetor hit the floor with a heavy metallic sound that he didn't register. Who found her? Another pause. And this one had something different in it. Something careful. Like the speaker was still working out how to say the next part, still testing the words in his head before committing them to air. An 8-year-old kid, boy from Asheville, was out looking for his dog, heard her calling from the creek woods, called 911 on a prepaid phone, and sat with her until the deputies arrived. The voice paused again. They said he didn't leave her side. Silence. The kind of silence that has mass, that takes up space in a room. 8 years old, Boone said, flatly. 8 years old. Another silence, longer this time, deep enough to drown in. What's his name? Caleb Whitfield. Mabel Whitfield's grandson. She's got a place on Hadley Road. Boone Kincaid stood in the middle of his garage with grease on his hands and a broken carburetor at his feet. And he did something that the men who knew him best, the men who had ridden beside him for 15 years, through situations that would test anyone's composure, would later say they had never once seen him do. His eyes filled. He didn't let it go further than that. He blinked once hard and it was gone. Pulled back behind the wall he maintained between what he felt and what he showed. But it had been there. And the man on the phone who knew Boone Kincaid about as well as one human being could know another who had been at his side through things that most people only read about in the news and shook their heads and caught it in the quality of the silence. Boone, he said, carefully, what do you need? Get everyone, every chapter, every brother who can ride. I want them staged and ready. His voice was very quiet now, and quiet was always worse than loud with Boone Kincaid. Loud meant anger. Loud meant the emotions were running hot and fast and would burn out eventually. Quiet meant something had gone past anger. Quiet meant the thing that was moving through him had settled into his bones and was not going to leave. And somebody find me the address for a family named Whitfield on Hadley Road. What for? Because an 8-year-old boy sat in the dark with my wife and held her hand until the law came, and I am going to look him in the eye and say thank you, and then we're going to handle the rest. The call ended. Boone Kincaid washed the grease off his hands at the utility sink in the corner of the garage. He did it slowly, methodically, working the soap into every knuckle and every crease and under every fingernail. The way a man does when he needs his hands to be clean before he does what comes next. The way a surgeon scrubs. The way a man of faith washes before prayer. Deliberately, completely. As though the act of cleaning is itself a preparation for something that requires all of him. His phone started buzzing again almost immediately. His sergeant at arms, his road captain, 2 other chapter presidents from neighboring counties. Word had moved the way it always moved in their world. Fast and total and irreversible. Like a current running through wire. Like blood moving through a body. 1 man told 2, 2 told 10, 10 told everyone. By the time Boone walked out of the garage and climbed onto his bike, he had 19 confirmations. By midnight, he had over 200. By morning, he would have 500. At County General Hospital, Jolene Kincaid was propped up in a bed in the trauma wing with a bandage over her left eye and IV in her arm, and 3 broken ribs taped and braced. The attending physician, a man in his 50s who had seen his share of violence and had learned to deliver information about it with the particular neutrality of someone who treats the body as a machine that needs repair rather than a person who needs comfort, had told her she was lucky. Nothing had punctured a lung. She told him she knew. A female deputy was posted outside her door. Not because anyone thought Jolene was a suspect in anything, because Harlan Briggs had called ahead and said in his careful, measured way that the situation surrounding this patient was complicated, that the patient's husband was who he was, that the people who had done this to her were who they were, and that the hospital should be aware that the next 24 hours were going to involve a level of attention that the trauma wing of County General was not accustomed to receiving. The nurse who came in at 7 to check vitals was a young woman named Angela. She had brown hair pulled back and the kind of face that managed to be both professional and warm at the same time. When she saw who was in the bed, she did a careful job of not reacting to any of it. The bruising, the leather vest folded on the chair beside the bed, the name on the chart. She had been trained to treat patients, not to judge them. And she held to that training with the discipline of someone who took it seriously. "Can I get you anything?" Angela asked. "Water. Are you hungry?" "Water," Jolene said. Angela poured it, handed it over. Watched Jolene's hands still slightly unsteady from the hours of being bound close around the cup. "Someone coming for you?" Angela asked. Gently. The way you ask when you want to know that the person in the bed is not alone in the world. "Yes. My husband." "Good." Jolene drank, set the cup down on the tray beside the bed, stared at the ceiling for a moment. The ceiling tiles were white and generic and identical to every other ceiling tile in every other hospital in the country. There was nothing on them worth looking at. But Jolene looked at them anyway because looking at them was easier than looking at the room and the IV and the bandage and the whole terrible inventory of what had happened. "There was a kid," she said suddenly. Angela paused in her charting. She looked up from the clipboard. "In the woods. A little boy found me." Jolene's voice was flat and factual. The tone of someone reporting something they have not yet fully processed. The tone of someone who is telling a story not because they want to, but because the story needs to come out of them before it settles into a shape they can't change. "He was out looking for his dog. He heard me and he came. He called for help and then he just sat with me. On the ground, like it was nothing. Like it was the most natural thing in the world." She paused. Angela didn't say anything. She sensed correctly that this was not a conversation. This was Jolene working something out in real time, processing it by speaking it, turning it over in the air so she could see all the sides of it. "I told him to run," Jolene said. "Twice. I told him to leave. I told him there might still be people out there who could hurt him." She looked at the ceiling, and he said no. 8 years old, and he said no. "How old was he?" Angela asked. 8. Angela set down her clipboard. Not because the charting didn't matter, but because this mattered more. "He asked me if I wanted him to stay," Jolene said, and I said yes. She let out a long breath that carried weight. "I haven't asked anyone for anything in about 12 years. I haven't needed anything from anyone. Or I told myself I didn't. And in the middle of those woods with a chain around my chest and my face broken and the whole world gone dark, I asked an 8-year-old boy to stay." She paused. "And he did." Angela picked her clipboard back up. She wrote something on it. Then she looked up. "What was his name?" "Caleb Whitfield," Jolene said. And the name came out differently from everything else she had said. Softer, with something carefully held inside it. Something protected. "Remember that name. That kid is going to matter." She didn't say it as a prediction. She said it as a fact she had already confirmed with her own experience. The way you say something, you know, not something you hope. Angela nodded. She left the room quietly, and Jolene Kincaid stared at the ceiling and waited for Boone. He arrived at 9:17 in the evening. She heard the motorcycles before she heard his footsteps. A low rumble in the parking lot that built gradually like distant thunder that was getting closer until it filled the entire audio landscape of the hospital. The nurses would later describe it as sounding like a storm coming in, not a figure of speech, a literal description. The sound of 200 engines idling in a hospital parking lot at night has a quality that is indistinguishable from weather. She heard the nurses talking in low voices at the station. She heard the deputy outside her door stand up straighter. She heard the squeak of boots on linoleum and the particular sound a heavy man makes when he is moving quickly through a space that was not designed for heavy men moving quickly. And then the door opened, and Boone Kincaid filled the frame of it. He was big enough that the door frame seemed like it had been built for a smaller species. His jacket was creased from the ride. His beard was slightly windblown. His eyes were dark and direct and carrying something in them that he was making no effort to conceal. And for the first time since she had heard Caleb Whitfield's voice in those woods, Jolene felt the last wall come down. She didn't cry loudly. She wasn't built for that. She had spent 15 years in a world where crying in front of people was a luxury she had decided she couldn't afford. But her face crumpled. Just once. Very briefly. The way a thing does when the pressure that has been holding it together is finally allowed to release. Boone crossed the room in 4 steps. He sat on the edge of the bed. He put both arms around her, carefully reading the ribs, and pressed his face into her hair. And he said nothing at all for a longer time. There was nothing to say that the holding didn't say better. She gripped his jacket with both hands. The leather creaked under her fingers. "I knew you were coming," she said. Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. "I kept telling myself, in the dark, I kept saying it, I knew." "I know." He said it into her hair. "I know you did." They stayed like that. Outside the room, the nurses pretended to be busy with charts that had already been updated. The deputy stared at the hallway wall with the fixed concentration of a man who was giving the people behind the door every possible inch of privacy he could manage while still technically standing guard. Then Boone pulled back, just enough to look at her face, to see the eye, the cut, the bruise along her jaw that had turned colors in the hours since it was inflicted, purple and yellow and dark at the center. Every muscle in his face went very tight, the way a face goes when the emotions behind it are being held in a container that is not quite large enough. "Tell me everything," he said, quietly, not a request, not a demand, something in between. The voice of a man who needs information the way a body needs oxygen and is trying not to let the need overwhelm the asking. She told him. She told him about the iron scorpions, about the 2 men, about the chain and the zip ties and the ride in the back of the van with a hood over her head, about the night, the cold, the dark. The absolute silence of the woods in the middle of the night when you cannot move and you cannot know if anyone is going to come. The hours that passed like something thick and slow. The moment when the darkness became so complete and the silence so total that her mind began to tell her with a calm and reasonable voice that was worse than screaming that nobody was coming, that this was it, that this tree was where it ended. She told it without flinching because that was how she was built. And Boone listened without interrupting because that was how he was built. And then she got to the part about the sound of someone pushing through pine brush, and a voice, a child's voice, calling hello. Boone's jaw moved, a single involuntary tightening that communicated more than words could have. "He offered me his water," Jolene said. "He had about half a bottle left, warm, and he just held it up and tilted it to my lips like it was the most obvious thing to do, like it was the only thing anyone would do." She paused. She looked at Boone. "And when I asked him why he was helping me," he said. She stopped. "He said, because you need it. That's all. 8 years old, because you need it." Boone Kincaid sat with that for a long moment. He sat with it the way you sit with something that is too important to respond to quickly. Something that needs to be received completely before you can speak about it. "I want to meet him," he said finally. "I know. I want to look him in the eye." "I know, Boone." He stood up. He was quiet for another moment, standing at the window, looking out at the parking lot where his brothers were waiting. Engine after engine, row after row, the low idle of 200 motorcycles in the dark, their headlights casting long pools of light across the asphalt like small separate moons. "Those men out there," he said. "Some of them rode 4 hours when they heard." "I know," Jolene said. "Not one of them asked why. Not one of them asked for details. They just came." "That's what you do," she said. "That's what you do. That's what you do," he agreed. He turned back to her. "But a kid named Caleb Whitfield did it first, and he did it alone. And he did it without knowing any of it mattered, without knowing who you were, or who I was, or what any of it meant." He looked at her steadily. "That Boone Kincaid said is something different." He kissed her forehead. He told her he would be back before morning. He told the deputy outside the door that if anyone so much as walked past that room wrong, he would personally make it a memorable evening for them. The deputy nodded once and said, "Yes, sir," which was not something he would typically say to a man in a leather vest with patches declaring affiliations that law enforcement generally did not look upon favorably. But somehow tonight it came out without irony. Boone walked back down the hallway, back through the lobby where the night staff watched him pass, with the particular wide-eyed caution of people who have just realized that their workplace has become a setting in a story that is much larger than their workplace. Back out through the automatic doors into the parking lot. 200 men looked up when he came through the doors. He stopped at the top of the steps. He looked out at all of them, at the bikes and the leather and the faces and the engines and the particular unmistakable solidarity of men who have dropped everything and ridden through the dark because one of their own was in trouble. "She's alive," he said. Just that. 2 words. And the sound that went through the parking lot, not a cheer, not a shout, something lower and more fundamental than either something that lived in the chest and not the throat, moved through 200 men like a single breath. Then Boone said, "In the morning we ride to Asheville. And first, before anything else, we find a boy named Caleb Whitfield." Nobody asked why, nobody asked for details. They just nodded. And somewhere across town in a small house on Hadley Road, Caleb Whitfield was asleep on the couch with Rusty pressed against his legs and his grandmother's hand resting briefly on his head before she turned off the lamp. And he had no idea, not the faintest shadow of an idea, what was already rolling toward him through the dark. Caleb woke to the sound of his grandmother's voice. This was unusual. Mabel Whitfield did not wake people up with her voice. She woke them with the smell of coffee and the sound of a cast-iron skillet and the particular way she had of moving through the kitchen that communicated without words that breakfast was a time-sensitive operation and tardiness would be noted. But this morning her voice came first, low, tight, carrying a frequency he had only heard from her a few times in his life, on the mornings after bad phone calls or unexpected visits, or the kinds of events that change the shape of a day before the day has properly started. "Caleb, get up. Come here." He sat up. Rusty lifted his head from the other end of the couch, ears forward, reading the room with the accuracy of a creature who had spent his entire life studying human moods. Caleb padded in his socks to the front window where Mabel was standing with her arms crossed and the curtain pulled back just enough to see the road. He looked out. There were motorcycles. Not a few. Not a group. Motorcycles parked along both sides of Hadley Road as far as he could see in either direction. Big machines. Heavy chrome catching the early light. Riders in leather standing in loose clusters or leaning against their bikes with the particular stillness of men who were waiting. Not impatiently, deliberately, the way soldiers wait. The way men wait who have been given a position and a purpose and are executing both with the discipline that comes from years of doing exactly this. Caleb counted. He got to 12 and stopped because the line went around the bend and he couldn't see where it ended. "How many?" he asked. "A lot," Mabel said. Her jaw was set. "Deputy Briggs called 20 minutes ago. Said to expect them. Said to stay calm. Are they here for me?" Mabel looked down at him. She held his gaze for a moment before she answered. She was deciding in that moment how much truth to give him and how to give it. And she decided, as she always decided with Caleb, to give him all of it. "Yes," she said. Caleb looked back at the road. He thought about Briggs on the porch the evening before, about Boone Kincaid's people, about the name Kincaid and what it meant in these hills, and what it meant that the woman attached to that name had been chained to a tree in the Creek woods, and that he, Caleb Whitfield, age 8, had been the one to find her. He didn't feel afraid. He wasn't sure what he felt. It was something closer to the feeling before a thunderstorm. That charged, pressurized anticipation where something enormous is about to happen, and the air itself seems to know it. "What do I do?" he asked. "You get dressed," Mabel said, "and then you stand up straight." He got dressed. Clean shirt, clean shorts. He put on his dry sneakers, the ones without the creak in them. He ran a hand through his hair. He looked at himself in the mirror for a second, not because he was worried about how he looked, but because he wanted to see who was looking back. The same kid, the same face, the same eyes. Good. When he came back to the living room, Mabel had her good house dress on and her hair pinned back, and she was standing at the front door with an expression that said she had made her peace with whatever was coming and was simply waiting for it to arrive on her terms. The knock came 3 minutes later. Mabel opened the door. The man standing on the porch was Boone Kincaid. He was exactly what Caleb would have expected if he had been expecting anything. Tall, broad, occupying the door frame the way certain men occupy spaces, not by pushing into them, but by simply being large enough that the space has to accommodate them. His beard was dark and full. His jacket was leather and worn in the way that leather gets when it has been through weather and years and the kind of use that doesn't care about appearances. But the thing Caleb noticed first, the thing that registered before the size and the beard and the leather, was the way Boone was not in a hurry. Everything about his posture communicated that he had nowhere else to be, nothing else to do. That this moment on this porch with this woman and this boy was the entire point of his morning, and he was going to give it all the time it needed. He looked at Mabel first. "Ma'am, my name is Boone Kincaid. I believe you know why I'm here." "I do," Mabel said. She held his gaze without blinking. "I mean no disruption to your home," Boone said. "I want 2 minutes with your grandson. That's all I'm asking for. You have my word. That's all I'm here for this morning." Mabel looked at him, long enough to make clear that his word was being evaluated, that she had a system for evaluating such things, that the system had been built over 63 years and was not easily impressed. Then she stepped aside. Boone came into the house. He moved carefully, with the self-awareness of a man who knows the impression he makes and has made a deliberate choice to minimize the threat of it. He looked at the living room, the couch, the needlepoint on the wall. He looked at Rusty, who looked back at him with the calm, intelligent appraisal of a dog who is reserving judgment. Then he looked at Caleb. He crouched down, the same gesture Briggs had made, that deliberate choice to come down to a child's level rather than stand above him. And in that gesture, something in the room shifted. "You're Caleb Whitfield," Boone said. "Yes, sir. I'm Boone Kincaid. Jolene is my wife." "I know. How is she?" The question came out before Caleb could stop it, clean and direct and completely unself-conscious. And Boone blinked once slowly, like the words had hit him somewhere he hadn't been expecting to be hit. "She's going to be okay. Broken ribs, bad eye. She's going to be sore for a while." He paused. "But she's going to be okay. Because of you." Caleb shook his head slightly. "I just called 911. "You did more than that," Boone said. "She told me all of it." He held Caleb's gaze. "She said you sat on the ground next to her and stayed. She said you gave her your water. She said when she told you to run, you said no." Caleb didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say. He had done those things. They didn't seem extraordinary to him. They seemed like what you did. "Why didn't you run?" Boone asked. Not challenging, not testing, genuinely asking. The way a man asks when the answer is something he needs for personal reasons that have nothing to do with the conversation and everything to do with his understanding of how the world works. "Because she needed someone to stay," Caleb said. "And I was there." Boone was quiet. Then he nodded, once, slow, deep. The kind of nod that means something has been confirmed that was suspected but needed hearing. "She also told me you passed along a message," Boone said. "Yes, sir." "And did you—" "I told the deputy." Jolene Kincaid didn't break. The muscle in Boone's jaw moved. He looked at the floor for 1 second. Then back up. "That's right. She didn't." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of leather. He unfolded it on his knee. A patch, black background, white lettering, precise stitching. In our world, Boone said, a patch means something. It means you're recognized, it means you belong somewhere, and that somewhere claims you back. He held it out. "This one says courage before fear. I had it made last night, after Jolene told me what you did." Caleb looked at it, then at Boone. "I'm 8, he said, and Boone smiled. Not a big smile, a small one. The kind that catches you off guard and changes the geometry of a face that was built for seriousness. "I know," he said. "You're the youngest person who has ever held one of these. That's the point." Caleb took it. It was heavier than it looked. The leather was thick and the stitching was tight and the letters were precise and clear. Courage before fear. He turned it over in his hands. "Thank you," he said. "No," Boone said. He stood. He looked at Mabel, who had been standing in the doorway of the kitchen watching all of it, with an expression that was carefully controlled and only barely concealing the enormous thing underneath it. "Thank you, ma'am, for raising someone like this. That doesn't happen by accident." Mabel pressed her lips together once, a brief compression that held something back. Then she said, "Would you like coffee, Mr. Kincaid?" And that was how the president of a 500-rider motorcycle brotherhood ended up sitting at a kitchen table in Asheville, Tennessee, with his hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that said "World's Best Grammy" on the side. They talked for 20 minutes. Mabel asked direct questions. Boone answered them directly. At no point did either of them talk around the things that needed to be said. They spoke about the town, about the Iron Scorpions, about what the road ahead looked like and what would and wouldn't be said publicly. Then Boone's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Something shifted in his face. I need to step out. He went to the porch. Through the window, Caleb watched him on the phone. His posture had changed. The openness of the kitchen was gone, replaced by something tighter, faster, operational. Mabel refilled Caleb's juice. She watched the window. Grammy, Caleb said quietly, something just happened. Yes, I see that. Boone came back 60 seconds later. He looked at Mabel first. There's a situation, he said. Some of the Iron Scorpions were spotted on Route 9 about an hour ago, moving toward this county. We don't know their intent. He paused. But I have people in position, and I want you to know that nothing is coming near this house or this family. Are we in danger? Mabel asked. Not if I have anything to do with it, and I have quite a bit to do with it, Caleb, Mabel said without looking away from Boone. Go get your shoes on. He went. He could hear them talking. Low, fast. Two adults negotiating something serious. When he came back, Boone was already at the door. I'm going to leave 2 men on your road. Visible. But they won't bother you. If anything changes, call Briggs and call this number. He held out a plain white card. Just a phone number. No name. That's my direct line. Anytime. Mabel took the card. Mr. Kincaid. He stopped. My grandson didn't do what he did for recognition or reward. He did it because it was right. And I need you to understand that what you do next, how you handle what's coming, is going to be the thing that tells me whether he did the right thing, giving his trust to a man like you. The room was very still. Yes, ma'am, Boone said. I understand. He left. Within 2 minutes, groups had broken off in different directions. 2 men remained on Hadley Road. They parked and stood beside their bikes, watching the road, not threatening, present. The morning moved. Briggs called, told Mabel the situation was being monitored, asked her to stay inside. She made lunch, put on a movie. Caleb sat with Rusty and tried to watch it, but mostly listened to the distant rumble of engines through the county roads like weather moving through. At 11:17, 3 things happened almost simultaneously. First, Briggs's cruiser came down the road fast. He went straight to the 2 men at the property edge and said something, and they both got on their phones immediately. Second, Caleb's phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. 4 words. He is coming. Tell Boone. He read it twice. Third, from somewhere on the far side of the county road, a single gunshot. Mabel came through the kitchen doorway in 2 seconds flat. Face white, eyes clear. Down. Caleb. Down now. He was already off the couch. Rusty pressed against his side. Mabel dropped beside him, one arm around his shoulders, back against the couch, all eyes on the window. Outside, controlled chaos. The 2 men moving in a trained way that was different from panic. Briggs behind his cruiser, radio up. Engines from down the road. Not the calm idle of the morning. The hard, urgent rev of machines being pushed. Grammy. His voice was steady. I got a text. She looked at him. He held up the phone. Her face changed. Boone's number. Give me Boone's number. He reached into his pocket. The patch was there. The white card. She took it. Dialed. 1 ring. This is Mabel Whitfield. My grandson just received a text from an unknown number. It says he is coming. Tell Boone. I don't know who sent it or what it means, but I thought you should know right now. A pause. Short. Read me the number it came from. She read it. Another pause. Longer. Something changed on Boone's end. Background voices. An engine shifting pitch. Mrs. Whitfield. I need you and Caleb to stay away from the windows and stay on the floor until I or Deputy Briggs tells you it's clear. Do you understand? I understand. It will be resolved quickly. The call ended. They sat on the floor, Rusty between them. Sounds outside. Engines. Voices. Radio static. One more distant sound. Then waiting. Mabel held Caleb's hand. He let her. The hand-holding was as much for her as for him, and they both knew it, and that knowing made it right. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Then silence. Clean, Sudden. The exhale of something resolved. Briggs knocked 90 seconds later. All clear. Nobody hurt on this end. Two individuals in custody. He looked at Caleb. You're safe, son. Caleb exhaled. He hadn't noticed he'd been holding it. The text Mabel said. Briggs nodded. We're working on it. Might have been a warning from inside their own group. Someone who wanted it stopped before it went further. He paused. Might have been someone who knew what this boy did and didn't want to see that come to harm. Meanwhile, at County General, Jolene Kincaid was getting dressed. The attending physician had told her she needed 2 more days. She told him she appreciated his opinion. She pulled on her boots. She buckled her vest. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, at the bandage, at the bruise, at the careful way she held her left arm against her ribs. She looked at the woman in the mirror and decided that this woman was done being kept. Not kept by the Iron Scorpions, not by the hospital, not by the version of herself that had spent 15 years waiting for other people to decide what she was worth. She walked out of the room, past the nurse who said, Mrs. Kincaid, the doctor really recommends. And Jolene said, I know what he recommends. Tell him I said thank you. And she kept walking. She called Boone from the parking lot. He told her about Route 9, about the custody, about the text. She listened. Then she said, I want to go to the fairgrounds. I want to be standing when people see me, not lying in a bed. There was a pause on Boone's end. Are you sure? Am I sure? Boone, I spent a night chained to a tree and I didn't break. I think I can handle standing in a parking lot. Another pause. Then something that might have been a laugh. I'll send someone to pick you up. I'll drive myself, Joe. I'll drive myself, Boone. That's the point. One more pause, then, okay. And she heard in that single word a shift that had been 15 years coming. Not concession, recognition. He was seeing her, not Boone's wife, her. But before the fairgrounds, before the town and the work and the people, Jolene Kincaid did something she hadn't told anyone she was going to do. She drove to Hadley Creek. She parked on the shoulder where the old logging road met the county blacktop. She got out of the truck slowly because her ribs reminded her with every movement that they were not finished being angry about what had happened to them. She walked into the woods. The morning light was different from the afternoon light that had been falling through the canopy when Caleb had found her. It was sharper, cleaner. It came through the pines at a lower angle and hit the ground in long, white bars that looked like they were painted on the forest floor. She walked the path. She recognized pieces of it. A bend in the trail she remembered from the moment they had dragged her off the logging road. A particular cluster of pines that she had seen through the hood they'd put over her head, the fabric thin enough to let shapes through without details. The sound of the creek getting louder. And then she was in the clearing. The oak tree stood where it had always stood, massive, ancient, indifferent to everything that had happened at its base. The bark was marked where the chain had been pale scratches against the dark surface. The ground around the roots was disturbed where boots had moved and equipment had been placed and a stretcher had been lowered and raised. The chain was gone. The deputies had taken it as evidence. But the water bottle was still there, Caleb's water bottle, the one he had tilted to her lips, the one that had been half full of warm water that tasted like plastic and salvation. It was lying on its side near the root of the tree, empty, forgotten in the urgency of the rescue. Jolene stood in the clearing. She looked at the tree. She looked at the place where she had been sitting. She looked at the marks in the dirt where the chain had pressed into the ground. And she stood there until the standing was done. Not rushing, not performing, not checking it off a list of things she needed to do to recover. She stood there until the place stopped having power over her, until the tree became a tree again, until the clearing became a clearing. Until the memory of the night loosened its grip just enough for her to breathe in this place without the breathing costing her something. It took about 10 minutes. She counted them, not on purpose. Her body counted them the way a body counts the contractions during labor. Automatically, because the body needs to know how much time has passed between the bad parts. When it was done, she looked at the water bottle one more time. She thought about picking it up, about putting it in her pocket and carrying it out of the woods the way she was carrying everything else, as a weight she would distribute across her life until it became manageable. Then she thought a picture is better, something that lasts. She took out her phone, Jammerman. She propped the bottle carefully against the root of the tree, and she took a photograph, a Polaroid-style photo. The oak tree in morning light, the marks on the bark, the empty water bottle leaning against the root like evidence, like testimony, like the last remaining proof that on this spot at this tree, something had happened that mattered. She put her phone away. She looked at the clearing one last time. Then she turned and walked out of the woods. And the walking felt different from the walking in. Lighter, not lighter in the body, the ribs saw to that. Lighter in the way that a person feels when they have gone back to the place that hurt them and found that they are bigger than it. She drove to the fairgrounds. The work was already underway when she arrived. Boone had gotten there before dawn. Men with tools and lumber were fixing the collapsed playground fence. Others were unloading paint for the community building. Two men with chainsaws were dealing with the dead oak on the walking path. This had been Jolene's idea. She had said it to Boone the night before in the hospital in the quiet that followed the telling. Don't go to war in that town, she had said. Go to work. Show them who you actually are when you're not being what they're afraid of. Boone had looked at her for a long time. Then he had said, that might be the smartest thing anyone has said to me in 15 years. Now she stood at the edge of the fairgrounds and watched and felt that rattle in her chest. The same rattle from Ridgewater, from Highway 11, from every moment in her life when she had recognized something bigger than the space she'd been given. Except this time she wasn't watching from a porch, she was in it. The town arrived cautiously from about 15 feet away. Wanda Faye Hollis was there, hands on hips, watching Colt measure and cut fence boards. You do this kind of thing often? Not often enough, Colt said. You want coffee? Yes, ma'am. Wanda came back with two thermoses. Caleb and Mabel arrived at 10:30. Mabel carried a covered dish of peach cobbler because Mabel Whitfield did not show up anywhere empty-handed. Boone came over, and beside him Jolene. She had the bandage over her left eye, her arm held carefully against her ribs, her vest clean, her boots on. Back in her colors like a declaration. She looked at Caleb. He looked at her. Different from the clearing. No chain, no blood, no emergency. But the recognition between them was instant and total. The way it is between people who have shared something outside the normal rules. Jolene crouched down carefully. Hey, Caleb. Hi. You got out of the hospital early. A sound between a wince and a laugh. Yes, I did. Did the doctor say it was okay? The doctor said I needed rest. That's not... Yes, Boone laughed behind her. You're right, Jolene said. That's not yes. She put her hand on his shoulder. I needed to be here. I needed to be standing on my own feet, not lying in a bed. Can you understand that? Because if you stayed in the hospital, Caleb said slowly, it would feel like they won. Her hand tightened on his shoulder. Yeah, exactly like that. She stood. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the photograph. The Polaroid of the oak tree. The water bottle against the root. I went back this morning, she said. I needed to see it in daylight. I needed to stand there and know it was over. When I was leaving, I saw the water bottle. I thought a picture was better, something that lasts. He folded it carefully, put it in his shirt pocket. Thank you. Thank you, she said back, and meant it in the way that changes the word from social routine to something weight-bearing. The morning moved, small moments accumulating. Colt finished the fence. A girl tested the gate 3 times. Thumbs up. The building got its first coat of white. Sandra helped with the trim by 11. Briggs was there, hat in hand more often than on head. He and Boone had a 12-minute conversation at the edge of the building that involved both of them looking at the ground. At 12:40, Dale Stuckey pulled his truck in. This is still a public space, he said loudly. I don't care what they're doing. These people don't belong here. The fairgrounds got quieter. Boone heard it, looked, decided something. Jolene gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Let someone else. Mabel set down her cobbler dish and walked over to Dale. Dale, my grandson found that woman chained to a tree. He's 80 years old. He sat on the ground next to a stranger and held her hand until help came. These men came because of what he did. They're fixing the fence nobody fixed in 2 years. Painting the building nobody painted in 10. She paused. What exactly are you objecting to, Dale? The fence, she said. The paint. The fact that someone showed up and did something. I'm genuinely asking. Tell me the problem and I'll listen. Dale looked at the fence, the building, the people working together. Sandra with her paintbrush, Wanda with her thermos, A teenager named Marcus helping with lumber because nobody told him not to. It's not that, he said, lower than what fear showed itself. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they want. And I don't know what happens when they leave. Mabel looked at him. Not unkindly, neither do I. But I know what happened 2 days ago, and I know what's happening right now. Sometimes that's all you get. She walked back. Dale stood for a minute, then walked to Colt. You need a hand. Yeah, I do. Dale loaded lumber for 45 minutes. Boone sat beside Caleb on a bench. Your grandmother is remarkable, Boone said. I know. She did in 2 minutes what I've spent 15 years failing to do. Made them less afraid. Not by telling them not to be, by asking what specifically they were afraid of. Most people, when they name it exactly, realize it's smaller than they thought. Or they find out it's real, Caleb said. Boone looked at him sharply. The iron scorpions were real, Caleb said. Yeah, they were. So how do people know the difference? Boone was quiet for a long time. You look at what they do when nobody's watching, he said finally. When there's no camera, no crowd, no reason to perform. You look at what a person does when a kid is alone in the woods and nobody's going to see, and there's no reward. That's when you find out what something is made of. I wasn't trying to find anything out. I just heard her. I know, that's the point. Jolene sat on Caleb's other side. They sat together, the three of them, in the companionable silence of people who don't need to fill the space. Then Jolene said, the man who sent the text. He called me this morning. He wanted to know if the boy was okay. She paused. He said he saw them take me. He said he watched it and didn't stop it, and he's been carrying that. He said when he heard about Caleb, he thought if an 8-year-old can decide to stay, then what's my excuse for leaving? So he sent the warning, Boone said. He sent the warning and walked away from 12 years because of what this kid did. She looked at Caleb. You started a chain reaction, Caleb Whitfield. I just stayed. That's the chain reaction, Jolene said. At 3:15, Emmett Pryor arrived, a journalist, Knoxville Tribune. He worked the scene, talked to Wanda first, which was tactically smart, and a mistake simultaneously because Wanda told him everything at full volume with editorial commentary. He came to Caleb. Are you Caleb Whitfield? Who are you? Mabel materialized at Caleb's shoulder. Pryor gave credentials. Said he'd heard on the scanner. Said there was a story people should hear. There is, Mabel said. But my grandson is 8. You speak to me first, he asked. She answered what she chose. When he asked about the motorcycle club, I see people fixing a fence and painting a building. About the iron scorpions, that's for Deputy Briggs. About Caleb. My grandson heard a person who needed help, and he helped. I raised him to do that. I hope someone raised you the same way. Then Pryor asked for one question. Just one. Mabel left it to Caleb. Okay, when you heard her voice, what made you go toward it instead of away, Caleb thought. He thought about the deer with its eyes still open, the man against the pine, his grandmother's voice. I don't know how to walk past, he said. Pryor wrote it down. And those 6 words would appear on the front page of the Knoxville Tribune the next morning. And from there they would go places that no one standing in that fairgrounds on that afternoon could have predicted or prepared for. But that was tomorrow. Today the fence was fixed. The building was white. The dead oak was cut and stacked. Sandra had paint on her cheek. Wanda had gone through 3 thermoses. Dale Stuckey was sitting on a tailgate with a rider named Dennis, talking about truck engines with the ease of men who had found common ground in the specific. And Jolene Kincaid stood in the middle of all of it and felt for the first time in 15 years like she was standing in her own name. The newspaper hit the stands at 6:15 the next morning. By 7, Mabel's phone had rung 4 times. The first call was a woman from Chattanooga crying, saying she'd read the words, I don't know how to walk past, and had to pull her car over. Mabel listened, said thank you, made coffee. The second was a radio station. She said no thank you and hung up. The third was Pryor telling her the piece had been picked up by 3 other papers. She appreciated the courtesy. The fourth was Boone. Have you seen it? I've seen it. How's Caleb? She looked through the doorway. Caleb was still asleep, rusty across his feet, 12 hours straight. He's asleep. I'll let him sleep as long as he sleeps. Good. When he wakes up, I'd like to come by. It's okay. A pause, then, it's getting bigger than the Tribune, Mrs. Whitfield. 17 calls before 6 a.m. Two TV stations, one national outlet, a veterans organization in Nashville wants to name an award after him. Mabel sat down. He's 8 years old. I know. I'm not telling you to do any of it. I'm telling you so it doesn't land on you sideways. Come by at 10. When Caleb woke at 9:40, Mabel handed him the newspaper without comment, giving him space for his own reaction. He read it slowly. Twice. He used my words. He did. He looked at his name in print. Caleb Whitfield, age 8 of Asheville, Tennessee. Grammy. People are going to look at me different now. It wasn't a question. Yes, some of them will. I don't want to be different. I want to be the same. You can be. What people see and what you are, those are two different things. You get to decide which one you live in. She held his gaze. You understand me? He nodded, slowly, the way he nodded when something had gone all the way in. Good. Eat your eggs before Boone gets here. Boone arrived at 10 exactly. Jolene was with him, moving more easily. Behind them, 4 riders. Not a crowd. Company. They sat on the porch. Morning coffee. For a few minutes, just people sitting. Then Boone put his mug down. The man who sent you the text. His name is Virgil Tate. He left the Iron Scorpions 2 days ago. This morning, he walked into the Millfield Police Department and gave a full statement. Everything. Names, locations, operations. He paused. He said he'd been trying to find a reason to walk away for 3 years. When he heard what you did, he realized the reason didn't have to be complicated. He said if a kid could decide in 10 seconds to do the right thing, then the only thing stopping him for 3 years was himself. Is he going to be okay? Caleb asked. Boone looked at him. Working on it. He's cooperating. The DA's office is involved. He held Caleb's gaze. He wanted me to tell you something. He said you didn't know it, but you were in those woods for more than one person. Jolene pulled out her phone, showed Caleb the screen. The Tribune article. Shared 40,000 times since 6 a.m. What does that mean? It means people who've never been here read 6 words and felt something. What you did got out of this county. It's moving. Why? Because most people know they would have walked past. They know it. And when they see someone do the thing they know they should do but don't, it reminds them of who they want to be. That's not a small thing. That's maybe the biggest thing. I didn't do it for any of that, I know, Boone said. That's exactly why it matters. At 11:30, a TV van pulled down Hadley Road. Mabel stood and said no. The van sat for 45 minutes and left. But the pressure was real. Caleb felt it. Atmospheric, like air before weather. Jolene sat beside him, just the two of them and Rusty. Can I tell you something, yeah? When I was against that tree, the second night, right before morning, when my mind started telling me nobody was coming, I made myself a deal. I said if someone comes, I'm done making myself small. Done deciding what I deserve based on what people think of what I am. She paused. You know what I mean? Like people see the vest and decide something. Yeah, exactly. So I decided if I got out of those woods, I was going to stop waiting for people to see me, right, and just be what I actually am. Her voice was quiet and steady. And then you came through those trees, and you didn't see the vest first. You saw a person who needed help. You gave me back something I'd been letting other people take. You did that before you said a word. Just by coming, Caleb sat with it, then just sat there, which was what he'd done in the woods. And which still seemed right. You're going to have people tell you what this means for the rest of your life, Jolene said. Reporters, strangers, people who don't know you. They'll all have a version. I know. You know what it actually means? He looked at her. It means you're someone who hears a person calling and goes toward it. That's the whole thing. Don't let anyone make it more complicated than that. He nodded, tucked it away. He was building a collection. His grandmother's words, Boone's words, Jolene's words, a storehouse of things said by people who had come through fire and still knew what they were. The twist came at 1:15. A car pulled up. Not a van, not a cruiser, not a motorcycle. An ordinary car, dented on one side, out of county plates. A woman in her 60s stepped out. Short gray hair, sensible shoes, red-rimmed eyes. Boone came off the porch. His whole body changed. Loretta, he said, his voice dropped to a register Caleb had never heard. Careful, complicated, Old. The woman looked at Boone, then passed him at Jolene. I heard what they did to you, she said to Jolene. Her voice was tight. I heard. She stopped. Virgil told me before he turned himself in. He called me and told me everything and said he was going to fix it. The porch went still. Loretta Boone said carefully, Virgil is your son. Yes, her voice cracked on the word. He's my son. And what he was part of. What he watched happen. She stopped. I'm not here to ask for anything. Not here to make excuses. I'm here because I needed to look at the woman my son didn't protect and say I'm sorry. And I needed to look at the boy who did. She turned her eyes to Caleb. Red-rimmed, direct, full of something enormous being carefully handled. Because my son said an 8-year-old boy shamed him into being a man, and I needed to see that boy. 5 seconds of silence. Then Jolene moved. She came down the porch steps, carefully. She walked to Loretta, stood in front of her. And Jolene Kincaid, who had spent 15 years letting others define her, who had made a deal with herself against a tree in the dark, who had walked out of a hospital under her own power and stood on her own feet in front of a town and gone back to the clearing alone, and looked at it until it stopped having power over her, did the thing that completed the journey she hadn't known she was on. She chose what to do with the pain. Your son saved my husband's wife and a child from being in danger. He did that. Whatever else he did that too. Loretta pressed her hands to her face. One moment, then down. He's trying to do right. He's trying, I know, Jolene said. Boone knows. A glance at Boone. A single nod. Your son's choice mattered. It protected people. That's real. Loretta's chin trembled once. Thank you, she said. Jolene nodded, stepped back, didn't reach out, too much unresolved. But the space between them was not hostile. It was the space of two people who have found one true thing they can stand on when the ground around it is complicated. Loretta turned to Caleb. You're Caleb Whitfield. Yes, ma'am, Virgil said. She stopped. He said you stayed with her even after she told you to go. Yes, ma'am. Why not the way a reporter asks? The way a mother asks, searching for something she can bring back and put in the hands of her son, who is sitting in a police station 30 miles away, trying to rebuild himself. Because leaving would have been the wrong thing, Caleb said. And I already knew how to stay. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He looked at Mabel. Small nod. He took it, unfolded it. A letter. Handwritten. Looping pressured handwriting from Virgil. Short. 11 lines. The last 2 lines he read again. I don't know you, but you changed the direction of my life. I think you should know that. You should know that what you did mattered further than you can see. He folded the letter carefully, put it in his shirt pocket, next to the photograph of the tree. Tell him I said thank you, Caleb said. Loretta nodded. She thanked Mabel. She thanked Boone, who shook her hand with the gravity of a man meeting someone from the other side of a long war and finding they are underneath everything just a person. She got in her car. She drove away. The porch breathed. Boone looked at Caleb, at the shirt pocket, at Mabel. Does he understand? Boone said quietly. What kind of person he is? Mabel looked at her grandson with 63 years of attention and a grandmother's knowledge of a child's particular soul. Not yet, she said, but he will. The afternoon came down slow and warm. The riders gathered at the fairgrounds one last time. Not for work. The work was done. They gathered to leave. 500 engines idling in formation. The sound moved through Asheville like a tide going back out. Caleb stood at the edge with his grandmother and watched. Boone stopped beside him, crouched down. You got questions about any of this, anything, you call that number. Anytime, yes, sir. And Caleb, he waited until the boy was fully looking at him. When you're grown, and you will grow into someone worth watching. Remember this week, not the newspaper, not the patch, not the 40,000 shares. His voice was low. Remember the creek. Remember what it felt like to hear someone calling and go toward it. Keep that. Don't ever let the world talk you out of that. I won't. Boone stood. He walked to his motorcycle, started it, and 500 engines rose together and moved through the town. Jolene was the last. She had waited, on purpose. She pulled to the edge of the road where Caleb was standing, cut the engine, took off her sunglasses, looked at him with both eyes, the left still healing, the right steady. Together, they held everything that had passed between them. Silence, the right kind. I spent 15 years being somebody's title, she said. Somebody's wife. Somebody's old lady. That's done now. You want to know what changed it? Caleb waited. A boy in wet sneakers who looked at me and didn't see any of that. He just saw someone who needed help, and he stayed. She held his gaze. You didn't just save my life, Caleb Whitfield. You gave me back my name. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple, a small salute, precise and true. She put on her sunglasses, started the engine, pulled away. But at the bend in the road where Hadley turned toward the highway, she stopped. Just for a moment, she looked back at the town, at the white building, the repaired fence, the road she'd been carried down on a stretcher 3 days ago and was now leaving under her own power on her own machine with her own name. And she smiled. Not a performance. The quiet private thing that happens on a face when something that was broken has finished setting itself right. Then she rode. The sound faded. The road was quiet. Asheville settled back into itself, but differently, changed. Mabel put her hand on Caleb's shoulder. He had the patch in one pocket and the photograph in another, and the letter over his heart, rusty against his right leg. The fence fixed, the building white. And somewhere 30 miles away, Virgil Tate was sitting in the wreckage of his old life, trying to build something true. Because a boy in wet sneakers had heard a voice and gone toward it. Grammy Caleb said, She said I gave her back her name. Mabel was quiet. She looked down the road where the last engine sound was disappearing. That's a big thing to carry. Is it too big? Mabel looked at her grandson, at the boy who had walked into the woods chasing a dog and come out carrying something he would hold for the rest of his life. Nothing's too big if you carry it right, she said. And you, baby, have been carrying things right since the day you were born. They walked back to the house. Rusty trotted ahead, checked the fence, found no gaps worth exploiting, circled back. Inside, Mabel started supper. Caleb sat at the kitchen table with the patch and the letter and the photograph propped against the salt shaker. Then he got up, opened the kitchen drawer, took out paper and a pencil, sat down, and he wrote slowly, carefully in the uneven handwriting of an 8-year-old boy who had something to say. Dear Virgil, my name is Caleb Whitfield. You don't know me, but I think maybe you kind of do. I got your letter and I wanted to write back because Grammy says when someone tells you something important, you should tell them something back. I don't think you should feel bad about not stopping what happened. I think you should feel good about stopping what came next. Those are different things, and I think the second one is the one that counts. I hope you're okay. I hope things work out. Grammy says the honest answer is always better than the comfortable one, so here is mine. I was scared in those woods, really scared. But I stayed because sometimes staying is the only thing you can do, and it turns out to be enough. I think maybe that's what you did too. You stayed as long as you could, and then you left when leaving was the right thing. Grammy says knowing the difference is the hard part. Jolene is okay. She stood up today in front of the whole town, and she looked like she was okay for real, not just pretending okay. I think you would have been glad to see it. Thank you for the warning. Thank you for keeping me safe. I'll keep your letter, your friend Caleb Whitfield. Age 8, he folded it. Put it in an envelope. Wrote Virgil Tate on the front. Grammy, I need to mail this. I'll get you a stamp, she said. The stamp went on. The envelope went on the counter beside the door where outgoing mail lived. And Caleb Whitfield went to the living room and sat on the couch with Rusty and looked out the window at the evening light falling across Hadley Road. The road where 500 motorcycles had been parked that morning and where now there was nothing but the trees and the fence and the mailbox and the ordinary, unchanged shape of a life that had changed completely. Mabel called him for supper. He ate, helped with the dishes, brushed his teeth, got into bed. Rusty jumped up, turned 3 circles, settled against his feet. And in the last moment before sleep, Caleb thought about Jolene at the bend in the road. The way she stopped, the way she looked back, the way she smiled. You gave me back my name. He closed his eyes. He slept. And somewhere on a highway heading west, Jolene Kincaid rode with the visor cracked open and the night air on her face. And for the first time in 15 years, when she thought about who she was, the answer came in one word: her own.